When people hear the word awareness, it often sounds sort of vague or slightly mystical. You'll hear phrases like raise your awareness or be more aware, but very rarely does anyone actually explain what awareness is or how it works. In reality, awareness is one of the most practical capacities a human being can develop. It isn't a mysterious state reserved for monks or spiritual teachers. It's a skill, and like many skills, it can be trained. Understanding awareness starts with understanding how we normally perceive the world. When I was 19, I was studying sculpture at Bath Academy of Art in the UK. And at the beginning of my second year, I hit this immense creative block. I had no idea what to make next. And I remember my tutor listened for a moment and then gave me an assignment that sounded incredibly simple. He said, make a sculpture based on a chair. Now, that didn't sound particularly exciting to me. Chairs didn't seem like a very inspiring subject at all. And then he added another instruction that completely changed the exercise. He said, forget everything you know about chairs. Now, that's a very strange instruction when you think about it. How do you forget everything you know about something as familiar as a chair? Whenever we look at an object, our brain immediately activates a huge amount of stored information. We recognize what the object is, whether it looks comfortable, what environment it belongs in, how it's used, and often what it reminds us of. A wooden chair might suggest a dining room. A metal stool might belong in a workshop or a bar. A plastic chair might belong in a garden. And all of that information appears almost instantly. What my tutor was asking me to do was something completely different. Instead of seeing a chair, he wanted me to see shapes, angles, proportions, and relationships. He wanted me to encounter the object as if I'd never seen one before. Now, at that time, I didn't have the language for what he was teaching me. And looking back, and I often think of that moment as my first real lesson in awareness. Awareness begins when we learn to perceive something directly rather than immediately interpreting it through memory and habit. At its simplest, awareness is the ability to recognize what's happening while it's happening. Now, that might mean noticing a thought as it appears, recognizing an emotional reaction in real time, sensing tension in the body, or observing details in the environment that normally pass unnoticed. The brain is extremely efficient. It constantly organizes incoming information by comparing it to what it already knows. And this allows us to move through the world quickly without analyzing every single detail that we encounter. But that efficiency comes at a cost. Much of our experience becomes filtered through habit and expectation. We stop seeing things directly and instead see our interpretation of them. The same process happens internally. A sensation in the body gets labeled as anxiety. A thought gets interpreted as truth. An emotional reaction becomes part of our identity. Awareness introduces a small but powerful shift. Instead of simply reacting to experience, we begin to observe experience while it's unfolding. For example, the mind might produce the thought, I'm worried about this situation. When awareness is present, you can recognize that thought appearing. You might also notice how the body responds to it, perhaps through tension in the chest or a change in your breathing. The thought is still there, but your relationship to it changes. Now, psychology sometimes calls this metacognition, the mind's ability to observe its own activity. And once that capacity develops, reactions become easier to recognize as they're forming rather than only after they've already taken over. One reason awareness feels difficult is because the brain is designed for efficiency rather than observation. The brain simplifies life by automating repeated behaviors, driving a familiar route, brushing our teeth, typing on a keyboard, tying our shoelaces. These actions eventually just run on autopilot. And this is extremely useful because without it, everyday life would be really quite exhausting. But it also means that large parts of our lives unfold with very little observation. Training awareness reintroduces attention into these automatic patterns so we can begin to see what's actually happening. Awareness is closely related to two other ideas that often get mixed together: attention and consciousness. Now, consciousness simply means that experience is happening at all. When we're awake, consciousness includes thoughts, sensations, emotions, and perceptions. Attention is where the mind focuses within that field of experience. Awareness is the ability to recognize both the experience itself and where attention is moving within it. For example, you might be reading a page and suddenly realize your mind has wandered into a memory from earlier in the day. The memory appeared, attention moved towards it, and then awareness recognized the shift. That recognition is awareness in action. And one of the interesting things about awareness is that perception itself can be trained. Artists learn this very clearly. When beginners start drawing, they often rely on symbolic memory instead of observation. They draw what they think an object should look like rather than studying what's actually in front of them. A tree becomes a trunk with a round shape on top. A face becomes a standard pattern of features. And one way to interrupt this habit is to focus on negative space. Instead of drawing the object itself, the artists study the shapes created around the object. And as soon as attention shifts to those relationships, perception changes. Details that were previously invisible suddenly become very obvious. I sometimes use similar exercises when I'm teaching perception. Recently, in a session of the Abundant Self program, I asked participants to draw an object that had been placed inside an opaque bag. They were allowed to explore the object with one hand, but they weren't allowed to see it. The drawing had to be created entirely through touch. Now, at first, this feels very strange. Drawing is usually associated with sight, but as attention settles into the sensations in the fingers, the structure of the object begins to emerge. Curves, edges, textures, and proportions become clear through tactile perception. And this exercise reveals something really important. Vision is only one channel through which perception gathers information. Touch, sound, movement, and spatial awareness also provide detailed sensory data. Training awareness expands how these channels are used. As awareness develops, another layer begins to appear. Patterns of behavior become easier to recognize. Situations that trigger certain reactions become visible earlier in the process. Habits that once seemed automatic begin to reveal themselves as patterns. Sometimes this leads to very practical insights. For example, one person I worked with through training her in Reiki began noticing a connection between recurring physical discomfort and certain foods that she regularly ate. As that connection became clearer, her behavior changed naturally and the discomfort disappeared. The body had been providing information all along. Awareness allowed that pattern to become visible. And ultimately, awareness brings clarity to our experiences. Perception becomes more precise. Reactions become easier to recognize. Behavior becomes more intentional. Life still presents challenges and complexity, of course, but the ability to observe experience clearly provides a stable foundation for responding to those situations. Awareness begins as a skill. With practice, it gradually becomes a way of engaging with the world.